Got another conversation on the podcast today where I talk to someone who I find interesting and try to pick apart their mental model for how they think about the world and understand the various connections that they've been able to make between seemingly disparate areas of their lives. In this case, we've got Justin LoFranco from the Morning Chalk Up on. And in this case, Justin has background in politics, involved in a lot of different campaigns, involved in social media for political candidates, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of that insight actually helped him start a CrossFit-based newsletter called the Morning Chalk Up. And in some cases, there's these nice just so stories about how, I can see looking back how everything kind of came together for me. But in this case, I think there's really a lot of fascinating insight that Justin had from his career in politics and how that helped him understand how to curate content for the CrossFit community, understand the different avatars of theoretical readers of his newsletter, and really tie it all together into a delightful 5-minute read for your morning coffee. So everyone should obviously subscribe to the Morning Chalk Up if you are in fact interested in CrossFit and fitness. They've shared some of my stuff a few times, and I've noticed several thousand more people on the old website downloading podcasts and all that kind of stuff whenever that happens. So always a nice boost when that occurs. Justin also had a vision for the Chalk Up that he really developed and has stuck to, which is always interesting, right? Is this balance between being able to have a vision of what you want to happen while kind of iteratively working towards it. And his ideas when he started are pretty much where he's at today, but he's been able to iterate and try to serve those avatars of different readers much better over time, and to start to get some traction with the old Chalk Up. So hope you enjoy this conversation. Have you been climbing any mountains recently?
Yeah, I have. Actually, I was in the Sisters Wilderness, which is in Oregon. It's right around Bend, Oregon, and I was attempting to climb South Sister around December 20th. Well, I flew out December 20th, so December 21st, and it was unsuccessful, but ultimately it was a really good time. The winter got the best of us, and the snow conditions just weren't really prime. It was making our sort of trekking a little bit more complicated, digging really through really deep snow. If you've ever done that in the wild, you know how challenging that is. It was like a CrossFit workout gone wrong. And with 40 pounds on your back, going up a hill in a snowfield for 20 miles, ultimately you're just like, we can't make it in our weather window, and so we had to turn back. But that was just a couple weeks ago, and I've got one actually in a couple weeks. So TBD on that one. I think the weather's looking really good. So that's up in the Sierras, more of the northern Sierras up near Mammoth. So we'll post some pics once we get up there.
So this is kind of like this isn't just like, oh yeah, I occasionally go out in the snow and like check out some scenery and walk up and down a little bit. This is a real thing.
Oh yeah, I climb pretty regularly, like 4 or 5 major climbs a year. And like minor ones too. This is a great example of Pat Sherwood's use your fitness. Get outside and use your fitness. And so, actually going out and doing that, and actually using the regular fitness that I am building up on a regular basis in the gym, and taking that outside and then using it for something else that I like to do. And that's a culmination of spending time hiking and camping outdoors and enjoying those things, and saying, well, how can we make that a little bit more interesting? And you'll kind of turn over, the other side of your head, look right, and you're like, wow, that's a pretty big mountain over there. Let's see if we could, make it to the top. And do I have the requisite fitness to do that? And the answer is yes, for the most part. Outside of some specific mountains that require like different kinds of training, longer expedition style climbs, I can pretty much just walk onto a mountain, and physically I can climb it. Now, maybe it's not the day for that mountain. Maybe the weather is bad. But am I in shape to do it? Absolutely. And so that's part of the way that I take CrossFit out of the gym.
And did you actually get into CrossFit because of mountain climbing, or is this the other way around?
No way. I wasn't climbing a lot of mountains in my past life when I lived in Washington, D.C. So I mean that was all hard charging 100-hour weeks, and CrossFit was probably the only reason why I wasn't morbidly overweight at that point, just because of eating poorly and a lifestyle of a lot of late nights and drinking and, that pizza at night and then maybe the pizza again in the morning when you wake up. So there's a lot of that was going on.
Did you reheat
life.
the pizza or not?
TBD. Like that wasn't the primary concern of mine. So I found CrossFit end of 2010 or 2011. I was training for a marathon, and I was young enough where I could still live that lifestyle and still be relatively fit. And I found CrossFit because a college buddy of mine had introduced it to me in college, and it just didn't stick with me back then. But it stuck with him, and I kept seeing him posting it on Facebook, and he was going on to sectionals back then. I think in 2010, and I'd seen these images on Facebook, and I was like, this looks really cool and stuff, and so I decided to give it a try. And for me, it stuck for me after that, and I would fit it in, running to class, late most of the time at the last class of the day, trying to get in at my 1 hour, and it was great. And I had no inclination to climb anything; it was mostly just a ladder of politics. And so after that. Once I quit politics and I started looking at other things and what things that I always want to do but never made any time to do it, hiking was the first step into that. And then from hiking, it went into mountain climbing. And it was like, okay, well, that was really cool, but I think we'd like to try that in snow and ice and, some other elements that I've never encountered before. So.
Sure. So there's some sort of tendency to find something that's kind of interesting and enjoyable and then decide that it's not hard enough and
right.
just escalate.
I am a CrossFitter, right? So there you go. That's par for the course.
And when you're hiking these mountains, are you thinking the entire time, wow, this is a really great metaphor for business?
No, I'm usually not thinking anything along the lines of business. I'm like, a lot of times it's just one more step, two more steps, similar things that everyday CrossFit athlete would think in their own head as they're going through a difficult or lengthy workout. Like you think of your 40-minute AMRAP or a hero workout, and you're like, just one more rep, just keep moving forward, just don't slow down. Those are a lot of the things that are going through because, hikes are great because hikes are really fun and nice. But when you get like on a glacier and you're at like a 45-degree angle and, every step is pretty freaking painful and you've been doing it for like 6 or 7 hours without a lot of breaks and you've got 40 to 50 pounds on your back and you're just trudging through the worst of the snow and you can see the end, but it's so far away. It's a workout. It's hard. Your heart is racing and you're like, okay, this is work. We're putting in real work here. And so that's a little bit more what I'm thinking. I'm like, okay, what would be nice right now? Ice cream, burger, sleep, anything like that. It's kind of a different mental game. Sometimes it's just hard to keep motivated sometimes. And that's where the CrossFit plays in big time. It definitely is great preparation for anything like mountain climbing.
Yeah, so it's just some understanding of being able to zoom in from that kind of like big picture of like, wow, that's really far away and I hate doing what I'm doing, to refocus on just like, I'm doing this right now and I'm okay. Yeah,
and sometimes, that's the self-talk is really important. Ben Bergeron highlighted this a study recently in a newsletter blast that he just put out, which was, two cyclists were put through 30 days of mental exercise and self-taught and then put into a chamber to do a max capacity test. And, after that 30 days, changing their mindset actually improved their overall performance by 2 to 3 minutes at their max capacity, which is showing, how much the mental barrier is between where your stopping point is. And so, sometimes it's just changing your mindset a little bit in the mountains, and it's also all for fun too. So, it's good.
Sure. And on the note of, mental barriers to performance related to mountain climbing, as someone who's never legitimately climbed a mountain, I have mentioned before in discussing mindset with folks the concept of the actual dangers of mountain climbing. Right?
Oh, sure.
I mean, it's like an actually thing, a thing where people die.
It's real life, yep.
Yeah, and my understanding is that a lot of people who die when doing mountain climbing are essentially pushing to achieve something, sort of against their better judgment, right? Where it's like,
Sometimes,
we're almost at the summit. Yeah, we just need to get up there.
200 feet.
Yeah.
Some of it's, I don't have any personal experience with Death on the Mountain, like, individuals who I know that have passed. But my take on it is that, there's a little bit of that. Some of it's ego driven, where, you're pushing that line between safe and unsafe to the point of trying to, get summit fever, essentially. So that's kind of one way of putting it. And the other is sometimes just a bit of unlucky. You're in the wild, and the wild doesn't play fair. And things like avalanches are a concern, on any type of snow slope. That really can happen 12 months out of the year in many cases. Ice fall or rock fall or a slip. And those are just realities of being up on a mountain. And you try to mitigate that risk as much as possible. And your smarter climbers are gonna constantly be reassessing and reevaluating, and they're gonna take their ego out of it too, which is a parallel to CrossFit, which is taking your ego out of it. And that's how people do get hurt. When they're doing 135-pound push presses and they really shouldn't be, and it comes down to the front rack and it breaks their clavicle because they just can't maintain the load. So taking your ego out of mountain climbing is super important, because it is going to keep you alive and it's probably going to keep all your limbs. But sometimes accidents happen. It's a dangerous sport. People die doing it, and people die doing it safely, and that's just the truth. So again, you always mitigating risk, but the more you take your ego out of it, the more likely you are to stay alive.
Sounds like a great analogy to business to me.
Yeah, sure it is. Right.
I feel like you should maybe start overlaying some motivational quotes on your pictures of yourself in mountains on your Instagram.
No, we do plenty of motivational quotes. It's funny because like my Instagram, I think it used to be a lot about CrossFit, and now it's all about just climbing and the outdoors. And I just decided to change it to something that I love more than something about more of a reflection of me than me. This is my own personal way of doing it, just because I spend so much time on the internet as writing an internet publication, that I wanted my own personal profiles to be a little bit less, content driven, just more a reflection of things that I liked.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And a place to show it.
So speaking of internet publications, The Morning Chalk Up, a delightful read to start your day. Subscribe now. So question on that is, people are always saying things like email is dead, that's too long, no one will read it, everyone's on social media, etc. However, you have built a business pretty rapidly focused entirely on a relatively long form email newsletter.
Almost all text-based. We originally started this. We're coming up on 3 years, so 3 years will be the end of February. And it originally started with quite a bit of images. And it was just the concept that images drive. Facebook, images drive. Instagram, clearly, images were driving. Twitter, and there was increased engagement levels on those platforms if you had associated image with the post. It's just how it was working back then, and it's how it works today still on those platforms. But I just decided to go the opposite direction. I started with that way, and then I was like, this isn't. Let's ditch all those images. Let's focus on doing words right, and not driving clicks, and not forcing clicks and click actions and such. It's just going to be, we're gonna focus on making sure that we're, getting people things that they're going to actually want to read. And we're not going to try and sell them a whole bunch of things along the way. And we're going to do that in a format that's really clear and really concise. And we're going to condense down sometimes complex things or things that people really should know. And we're going to make it easier for them to digest it. And we're going to try and keep that in a time frame that's very manageable. And so images don't always work well on mobile. But emails are really, really mobile consumed environment where people are constantly on the go, opening their phone. When they're reading the Morning Chalk Up, a lot of times they have a coffee cup in their hand and they're on their phone, and they're in their kitchen, or they're pouring over their meal in the morning. And so it's like, well, images just don't really play well to that environment exactly. And so I decided to kick them. I didn't get a lot of pushback. I just You know what I found, and I think I don't think it was as big of a surprise as some people think, but I found that people, if you genuinely put something together of value, like people didn't have a problem reading it. And there's also this concept and this notion that if somebody doesn't read from the start to finish, that you failed. I don't really think that's accurate. I think that, an email newsletter that has various parts is going to attract various types of readers and an audience. And so what we notice is some people really love, our things to section where they can just get a quick digest of things to get involved in, to do, to hear, to see, to watch, to buy, whatever it is that they're interested in. Some people really love the community section. They want to see what other highlights are going on around social media. Some people really want the long form reads that are down below. Some people want the stories at the top. And some people want the industry related news that kind of falls in between. And that actually broadens your appeal and allows you to bring in, more types of readers at large. And so it hasn't actually been nearly as hard. And it's funny, we haven't really used images in almost like 2 years, 9 months, something like that. We occasionally put an image in, but it's only to enhance the editorial content, not to just drive clicks. So
yeah, that makes sense.
And actually, it's funny, when we do put an image in, most people don't click on it. It's linked. Most people just don't click on it because we've trained them to see that as an enhancement and not a distraction and not a clickbait. So it's kind of been different.
Yeah. And are clicks for you something that you find important? Is your goal to drive people sort of clicking through on the various links? Or are you looking, because with email, you can't actually measure engagement in terms of how long people are reading the newsletter.
No, you can't. Yeah. You can't look at time spent on email like you can with a web page. So no, we can't measure that. Measuring clicks is an indicator of activity. So obviously we link to a lot of things. So if no one's clicking on it, it's going to be a clear indicator that there's a lack of interest in the types of things that we're doing. So it's either a lack of interest in the content itself or in how we presented the content, or both. And thankfully we haven't had that problem. And we have put forth content that is consistently blown through industry-wide metrics from click-through perspective. We will do 10,000 clicks in a day, to other properties and other sites and other content. To this Instagram video in aggregate, we were doing 10,000+ clicks a day, which is monstrous. And we know that roughly 30% of all people that open the email are clicking. That means they're not just reading; they're actually reading and they're taking an additional step, and that there's almost 2 clicks per open. So that's telling you, it's a key indicator to tell you that people are very active and they're very interested in the content. I don't take that to the bank and try and cash checks on it, but it tells me that we're doing it right, and that if we move the needle a little bit further, maybe we're doing it a little bit better. So.
And with those clicks, to get a little in the weeds with, email marketing and metrics and all that kind of stuff. Are you tracking each link individually? Do you have the capacity to do that, or is it based upon? Okay, cool.
Yeah, absolutely. We see every single link. We know exactly who clicks on what, and which link is clicked on how many times, unique or total. We pay. This is the bread and butter of our business. So we spend a lot of time inside of the email.
Yeah. And then based upon that, are you able to see the almost like a segmentation of the audience as far as, these people seem to be more interested in quote unquote competitive CrossFit. These people seem to be more interested in, business related content, those kinds of things?
We can, but we don't segment it that way.
Yeah.
But we can.
Yeah.
Content is dynamic and content changes rapidly and daily. So we don't, cover the sport of fitness every single day. We cover it a lot more now than we used to. But things like business-related items is a better example. Business-related items don't happen that often. So to create segments based off of business interest is kind of not useful because you're going to rarely touch it. It happens like maybe every other week at most, where a business-related item gets put in there. So no, we don't micro segment in any kind of way for content specific. We created archetypes of readers and users, and so it's just the way we did it at the time and the way we've continued to do it. But that may change in the future as content gets more dynamic. But right now, that's about as sophisticated as we want to be, because you need a really large, really massively large audience to have statistically significant pockets of people based off of interest groups, and then it becomes useful, and then it becomes actionable, because you can't do a lot with like a segment of like 2,000 or 3,000. Like you kind of need like the 15,000 person range in these segments, and there's going to be crossover in the segments too. So you have to you have to be careful about how much the wires start getting mixed there and keeping things organized and not confused. And so, a little bit into science there, but
yeah,
we haven't dived into that yet, and I don't see us doing that for another 1 to 2 years probably.
Sure. And is that based upon like list size growth, where you'd say, okay, once we hit this number of people, then it's worth segmenting to that level of detail?
It's not just the size, it's about what the point of doing it is, because we know that our readers don't read everything that we write, but they do gravitate towards the parts that are relevant to them. So for instance, like I'd articulated already, like some people like this section or this section or this section a little bit more. So you could change the versions of the newsletter to cater towards specific pockets of people, but it's not going to serve you that well unless if your content is so dynamic that you can actually serve up unique content to them that you are sure is not interesting to the other segment. And so that's a bit of a gamble, because you're going to serve up content to one person but not another person because you believe that it's not interesting to them. Whereas you could let the user choose that on their own, because there's not that much difference in length between having two pieces of content in there. And someone's going to say, well, that's not for me. I'm just going to keep it scrolling. People do that naturally as it is already. So I'm not sure that we would ever do it that way. From an advertiser perspective, when we start looking at like, okay, we want to geo-target, well, that's dynamic segments that are created constantly. And that's a very different proposition. And so that kind of data science is a very different conversation, because it's not it's content driven from an advertiser perspective, because we want to speak to people in specific locations or of specific interest groups. And so that is a very different conversation, and also very complicated, and not one we're doing right now. but we might. But that's way more complicated, and that really does require a lot of machine power to do, because you have to run these segments constantly on a daily basis, and so you have to have really in the weeds here. You got to have algorithms to govern and manage how those segments are created, because you don't do it manually anymore. You can't do that with tens of thousands of results returned based off formulas.
Yeah, so you'd have some sort of whatever machine learning piece that's kind of creating these segmentations.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have a query and submit a query based on what the parameters are, and then return a audience size, and then have it auto-generated. It's sort of like the way Facebook works when you go in and try and do a Facebook ad. So it's pretty complicated, but
sure,
we're not doing it because it's too complicated for where we're at right now. It would be way too much effort for the return on that.
Right. But at some point with a certain amount of engagement or list size, there may be value in being able to segment and say, hey, if you're this kind of sponsor, then we have this list and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there can be value down the road to do that. It has to be done really smart and efficiently. Otherwise, you're not really making money off the manual labor that it takes to do it. Yeah.
So with your archetypes then, to kind of zoom back out from these detailed algorithmic discussions, so who are you thinking of as the archetypal readers of the Chalk Up?
Well, so we have a handful of distinct audiences that we specifically write for. One is our everyday CrossFit athlete. That's a person going to the gym. That's 99% of CrossFitters going to the gym every day, looking to get fit. We have coaches and affiliate owners, and so those are the people that are instructing or owning of the gyms. Then we've got elite athletes. So, anybody in the elite athlete community, that's a former regional CrossFit Games hopeful, current CrossFit Games athlete, sanctionals athlete, or et cetera. And then probably anybody that coaches in the elite community too. So, there would be a handful of coaches that are instructing those athletes. Then we have the industry, the CrossFit industry itself. So anybody who makes their paycheck based on the CrossFit industry, anybody at one of the major companies or at CrossFit HQ or at Reebok or Nike or anybody else like that, that's another distinct audience. And then the last one is media. So it'll be somebody like you, Todd. Or any other podcaster, anybody who's writing about the sport of fitness or about the CrossFit community at large. So those are 5 distinct audiences.
Yeah. And is that something that you kind of sketched out those archetypes as you were starting the newsletter and you're like, all right, cool, here's sort of who we have, or is this something that has been more emergent?
That's how
kind of like, okay,
it.
This is who, yeah.
That's it's been that since the beginning. We specifically charted it out that way because they identified those as the audiences, and those that we wanted to make sure that every day or every week we were creating content that was going to be valuable to those people. So not everything is going to be interesting to everyone. We know that, but we do try and make sure that every group has something that is of interest to them, and that we are writing for those audiences.
Yeah, and so you sort of created these archetypes, and then it turned out that you were right. It's like, yep, these are the people who read this thing. Yep, we're good.
Yeah, at the beginning, I was really heavily focused on the elite community in the CrossFit industry, more of like an insider's publication, and really judo flipped that into focusing mostly on CrossFit athletes and everyday CrossFitters, and then the CrossFit coaches affiliates community, and that became the majority of our content was actually specifically focused on them. And that was really the right move because the CrossFit industry was growing, but it wasn't nearly as large as the affiliate community was, and that's where the bread and butter was. And there was so much more interest in bringing together sort of content from disparate parts of the world and putting it together for affiliate community. And so that was an intentional shift. It was actually after a conversation I had with Jason Kalipa, and he kind of made that advice, gave me that piece of advice, and he didn't know it at the time, but it really was spot on. So now we're making a little bit more of a shift to the sport of fitness, but we're not slowing down any of the community content. We're just increasing the level of content that we're focusing on from the sport of fitness because now the season's changed, and there's this big, long 15 sanction event season, and then the Open, and then the Games on top of that. So now there's a big need to fill these gaps, and so we're stepping in to fill a lot of those gaps, but we're not slowing down any of the community content. We're just increasing the amount of sports content that we're producing.
Yeah, and you mentioned that story about Kalipa's advice on his podcast, I believe.
Yeah, I did.
To him it was like a throwaway comment, and you're like, "Whoa, great idea."
To me, actually back then when I was standing there, I wasn't like bought in on it. I was still very much. It's easy to be like, "Oh yeah, it's all about the elite athletes and stuff," and the elite community. And we want to be like insidery because insidery is fun. It's sexy. It's I've got all the inside scoops on things, and so a little bit it feels way cooler more than writing about the 50-year-old who's irrevocably changed their life through CrossFit and gotten off of medications and is now looking at a really, really positive health trajectory. It's cooler to be like, oh, I've got the inside scoop on the Nano 9.
Yeah.
That makes you feel like way cooler. But, so at the time when he said it to me, I was like, okay, I'll think about it. And I did think about it. I gave it a lot of thought. And then I started to make that shift, and I made it, I made the pivot, and it was the right pivot. It really was. And it started to pay dividends in our growth.
And based upon that, to get a little bit more tangible, that pivot would look like what? Sharing people just sort of setting everyday PRs in their gym. It's not like this person snatched 315. It's like, this person snatched 135.
Yeah. So we've changed the style, not the style. We've changed the format of the newsletter a lot of times. Actually, it's a bit of an iterative document, and or I should say iterative format and outline. It's been in its current format for quite a while, but that's the culmination of a lot of shifts and adjustments. And we used to like highlight a lot of things that were going on around social media, but we never talked about the individual CrossFitter, the everyday CrossFitter, and their successes. We were only championing like the highlight reel, which is like the 300-pound snatch and the 285-pound clean and jerk, and big things like that. So I actually made this new section called Chalk Up in 2 Minutes, and it's a quick highlight reel of like. All kinds of highlights. It includes the stuff the pros are doing. It includes some of the crazy things that, maybe Olympic weightlifters are doing. And it also includes things that everyday athletes are doing all across the world in the CrossFit community, like first muscle ups and first, and a 115-pound snatch PR and, anything in between those things. It's congratulations on 1 year of CrossFit. Like those are big milestones in the community, and so that's a very popular section. People will sometimes be sandwiched in between Tia Claire Toomey doing something ridiculous, and then Josh Bridges doing something ridiculous, and then it's like that person's name right there, and they're 50,000th in the open. They don't have. They don't stand a chance against one of those other athletes, but that's not what we're comparing. We're just saying, look, this is part of what's the highlight of the CrossFit community. We're putting this together here, and great job. Congratulations. It's not about whether you made it to the games or not. It's about whether you're moving forward. It's about whether you're finding your fitness in your gym and realizing your goals and moving in that direction and pursuing it. That's great, and we want to highlight that accomplishment. So that's one type of content. And the other types is most of our stories are about CrossFitters. They're not about CrossFit Games or about CrossFit Games athletes. In fact, we write almost no stories about CrossFit Games athletes. You'd be hard-pressed to find one up until about 4 weeks ago when we did, 3 weeks ago when we covered the Dubai CrossFit Championship, because we just don't write that. We didn't write a lot of athlete profile pieces. We wrote, stories about what's going on in gyms, what's changing, some of the good, some of the bad, and all that kind of stuff. We just didn't focus on them. And so our main stories, our feature stories in the newsletter were really about fitness, health, community, growth, loss sometimes. There's tragedies in the community that are happening, and we're telling people about it, and sometimes being a rallying point for help when tragedy strikes, and things like that.
Yeah, and so you mentioned that at least pivoting the newsletter a little bit, not moving away from covering CrossFit as a sport, but pivoting it to have much more focus on community type of stuff. You mentioned that resulted in some growth for you guys. So what did that look like? Do you have an idea of the mechanism there?
Like specific numbers?
No, not necessarily numbers, but just, what about that pivot resulted in greater growth for the Chalk Up?
Well, ultimately, people, I think, from a psychological standpoint, I think people are most interested in reading about things that are about them or that they can relate to. And I think it's great when you can talk about somebody that did 30 unbroken muscle ups, but not a lot of readers that can relate to that. And there's not a lot of readers, especially in a growing older community. As CrossFit is aging, not just population, but is getting older as a fitness regimen, we are bringing in new swaths of individuals, new demographics, and there's a lot of older athletes that are coming in. They don't know how to tangibly understand 135-pound thrusters. Most of them can't front squat 135 pounds, and so I think that it's people want content that's inside of their world and their sphere and their understanding. It doesn't mean they don't want to hear about a Guinness Book of World Records. It's great to hear about that. That's cool. But if that's all you ever hear about, it's not relevant to you. You don't have aspirations to break a world record. You don't really have the physical ability to break a world record, most likely. And it's cool, but it's not relevant to you. Not day in and day out. Maybe you see it and you're like, oh, that's really cool. That's neat. But what I would really like to see is somebody like me accomplishing something great. And somebody like my mom accomplishing something great. And so it's about relevance. And if 99% of your readers are everyday CrossFitters, but you're only talking about 1% of your readers, you're a little bit out of sync. And I think that you can take that model and that understanding, if you know who your audience is, and translate that to any company. Who you often think you are as a brand may not be who your customers think you are. And if you don't know who your customers think you are, then you should be asking them, because if you don't know that answer, there's no you'd only be lucky to be in line with who they think you are, and that's just about business running. If you sell nutrition programming for elite level athletes, and all of your customers are over 45, then you are out of sync, and you are telling them about how to reach peak elite level fitness, and all of your e-blasts are talking to them about that, and showcasing athletes at the games, and all of the promotion materials show ripped abs and athletes that are just crushing it. You are out of sync with your audience, and you need to reevaluate that.
Yeah, I think everyone playing in the fitness space, particularly within CrossFit, runs into that at some point, right? Especially if you do have any relationships with folks who are on the elite level, whether that's on a international stage or even just a kind of a local stage. And you see a lot of companies rebranding their elite CrossFit segment, right? Where it's like, okay, here's our fitness program, and then here's what we use to actually train elite athletes. I mean, we see it with the CrossFit Games, kind of really trying to separate out the media landscape within, CrossFit.com, and then the more focused games related content. You've seen OPEX rebrand their individualized design coaching for elite athletes as Big Dogs.
Big Dogs. Yeah.
We did that at South Loop Strength and Conditioning, my gym in Chicago. Based upon that, right? I mean, we coach some high level folks, and we have a separate company called Legion to do that. And we've really tried to separate the idea of, there are competitors who train here, but that's not really what we're about, because we've seen the negative consequences in the market of constantly pushing, high level folks. It's
okay to do both. It's not wrong. Like, we cater to elite athletes too. Like, this is a bit of a humble brag here, but like, we have pros coming to us for answers to basic questions about what's going on in the season. We tell them, and we know the answers, and we have already prepared the answers and resources for them to help keep people informed. That's obviously a part of the community that we care about, and we want to help, and we want to work towards being authoritative on that subject. But so you can do both. You just have to know, who's your 99%, or who's your 70%, or who's your 60%. Don't be out of sync with who your customers are. I think if you talk to a guy like Jason Kalipa, he's really great about that. Like, he's so dialed into who the customer is. That's why they have, if you look at their program at NC Fit, they have several different fitness tracks for people that have really different fitness goals. And, they are really smart about that. He's very intentional, and he has some really valuable insight. Anybody who's listening who's going to be at Wodapalooza, if this actually comes out before Wodapalooza, he's given a talk on this, and he's going to touch on this, because he nails the stuff on the head. He's really insightful. He's a great resource to think about as a business owner about who your audiences are. You don't guess. It's not like who you think your audiences are. It's who your audiences actually are. And if you're not paying attention to that, you're not doing it right. You may get lucky, but eventually you'll get out of sync. You'll start taking the direction one way, and they're looking for something different. And if you have a competitor, maybe they go to the other one. I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say, is that I think a lot of people got away with that because the market wasn't as competitive previously.
Yeah, there was just one, or two, and it's it's an easy numbers game at that point,
But now if you're out of sync, like you mentioned, there's dozens and dozens of businesses eager to snap up all your customers, and they may or may not be CrossFit gyms, but there's enough people selling programs online, enough other group fitness models, enough
all
other individualized training.
There's a lot of competition in the marketplace, and that's just more about business related things. But know your customer. It's really important. You can't get away from that.
So we didn't really touch on your background in politics at all, but we have gone into the weeds on segmentation,
data science,
via emails, data science, algorithms, trying
things
to figure
I have
out.
not talked about on a podcast before are advanced segmentation models to whatever.
Well, you know what? Speaking of knowing your audience, I very purposefully called this Todd Neef Show because I get to talk about what I want to talk about, not what people want me to talk about.
Hey, that's fine. And you know what? There are plenty of examples of successful people doing that. And guess what? All you have to do is turn on cable news because every one of those shows has a name, and it's usually the name of a person. Sean Hannity, Anderson Cooper. This shouldn't shock you. Todd Neef, He's going to be the next one up.
There we go. Definitely chomping at the bit to get on cable news here. We're gonna fire off.
I'll mention to my contacts at CNN. You'll be on real soon.
I'm happy to make any variety of inflammatory statements necessary.
You'll last a solid week, I'm sure.
But to that point, we didn't really talk about this, but you have a very extensive background working on political campaigns, right? So it's not like you're just some guy who's going to write about CrossFit and hope that people sign up for it, right? Like you mentioned, you had a map of how you thought the chalk up would work, and you've obviously iterated it, but you essentially had a vision and were like, you know what, I can make this work. And it sounds like you were at least right about a very significant number of things as far as who you anticipated the subscriber base being, how you anticipated the kind of growth of the newsletter functioning, all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, that's kind of a roundabout intro, but really I'm curious, what is the relationship between your background in politics with segmenting out all these different theoretical avatars of people and how they, process content and make decisions? And how does that relate to, attempting to create this newsletter that touches on a lot of different things and resonates with a specific group of people?
Well, the answer is really straightforward. Politics is people. It's people at its most basic level. So to break that down for you, it's people in power, it's people at the voting block, it's people in the press, and so it's your ability to navigate complex and complicated situations with other people and know how to anticipate outcomes and read the scenario and read the room. But it's also people at its most basic level. Okay, in order for politics to work or for your ideas in politics to work, you're going to need to get buy-in. You need to get buy-in from everyday Americans that are just out there saying, this is how I'm trying to live my life. I want, this is what I'm looking for my kids and my grandkids, and this is what I want. The kind of dinner table conversations that you're having with your family. And if you're going to be involved in convincing people to buy into an idea at that level, then you can take that mentality or that mindset, say that we're going to change minds and we're going to convince this person that my candidate is the right candidate to do the job, or that my policy is the right policy to fix the problem or advance the solution, then you can take that to something that everybody's already bought into, like CrossFit, because our audience is passionate and they're curious and they love it and they are completely immersed in their world of CrossFit. And so it's actually such an easy sell, but it's the tools of being able to communicate in front of people and being able to identify people and say, okay, what's our strategy for reaching more CrossFit affiliates? What's our strategy for reaching more athletes that are 30 or older or 40 and older? What's our strategy for communicating and reaching people that are bought into the industry, and et cetera? And you could do that for every single pocket of individuals that we've identified, every group that we have. And you can do that, and you can say, okay, well, if you were intimate with every move that the company has made for the last 24 months, you could go back and you could say, oh, okay, I get why they made a shift from CrossFit Games-centered content to CrossFit community-centered content. They made a conscious decision to reach a specific group of their audience and bring them to the forefront and realign there. And then you could do the same thing with more industry-related news that we do now. And now we break news, which is relevant to everybody that's in the CrossFit industry, or more specifically, industry coaches and elite athletes and those that like the sport of CrossFit. And so, it goes just like that. But politics is people, and your ability to assess and read the room digitally, I guess in this instance, where people are and what they're thinking, is how I've translated politics to this area of CrossFit. And like I said, this is the easiest sell. They're already bought in. You don't need to convince. I don't need to convince a bunch of CrossFitters that they want to read about CrossFit. I just need to find them and tell them that we're giving them exactly what they already want. And then they realize it, and they're like, oh, wow, I do want this. I didn't even know it existed, but I'm so glad I found it. And then it's how to do it better, and then do it better, and then to keep improving that. And that's obviously the goal. The transition wasn't that hard. When you think about, the kind of work ethic that we have to have in politics in order to be successful, it's single-mindedness in the pursuit of goals, and putting forth all of our effort and passion into this culmination, which is the election. So we do that, every day, but instead of just an election period, but it's that concept. It's all of that, and I wouldn't be successful. I wouldn't be as successful, I should say, in the morning chocolate had I not gone through that time of learning and growth and development, and also seeing some really smart people in action. There's a segmentation, just the idea of like starting the morning chalk up, knowing there's identifying 5 audiences out there that we're going to create content for, would never have occurred to me had I not been, had a career in politics beforehand. So, very, very immensely useful.
Yeah, so it's not just the segmentation of the actual content as far as what people may potentially want from each of those audiences. But like you mentioned, there's actually potentially a unique strategy to reach each of those audiences and get them to take whatever action you might want them to take.
Yeah, and developing the relationships with them. By the way, it's a crazy thing, but most of the content that we now get for our community section is sent to us from people who want to see their gyms when they're athletes and their accomplishments highlighted, and that's fantastic, and we want to, and we include it, but that's the byproduct of including the community at its most basic level, and then all of a sudden they're like, whoa, that's my gym, they're in there, they're in the morning chalk up, that's freaking cool, and it is cool. And then another gym sees the same thing, and they're like, I want to be on the morning chalk up. We did something really similar to that, or even better than that. They don't say it that way, but sometimes that's what they're thinking. And great. Highlight your accomplishments. We're going to do that for you. We're going to help. And so we see a lot of that now.
Yeah, and to give a personal example of that, I mean, you guys have shared my stuff a few times, and members from the gym who I didn't even know were that bought into CrossFit, were like, we were in the morning chalk up today. I'm like, oh, well,
yeah,
I didn't even know you cared. I thought you were about to quit. What's going on here?
But apparently not, and so you'll have to let me know who those people are. We'll send them a gift package or something. That's cool. And that's my favorite phrase. It's just like, oh, we were in the morning chalk up today, and we're not that big of a deal, and we're not that big, but this is also a lesson out there for the business owners, is that you're about as big as you pretend to be. And we don't really pretend to be that big, but we look a lot bigger than we really are, and we look like we're a lot more influential because we treat it that way. We treat it seriously, and we take it seriously, and we don't give up, even on Thursdays when we're really tired and when another piece of news drops. We don't give up when that happens, and because we do that day in and day out, we built a lot of trust with people, and they look at it and they just say, look, man, I don't know what else I would read today. This is the biggest publication in the CrossFit industry, and whether we are or we're not, if our readers say we are, that's almost the ballgame. And maybe if we're not, we will be soon.
Yeah, and to kind of circle back on some of the political questions, something that I see with politics that is really interesting is that, obviously there's a very clear win or lose moment, right? If your candidate loses an election, everyone who's working on the campaign no longer has a job.
Yep.
That candidate
Fired.
no longer has a job. Like,
Correct.
it's just like, cool, the end.
The end.
And based upon that, there's this really fascinating interplay between, you know, the messaging that candidate has to have compared to what their actual, you know, policy or beliefs may be. Right, that you know that anyone can think of any number of examples where some political person kind of let loose with like the actual thoughts that they had as far as a nuanced answer to a question, or, you know, an example might be Donald Rumsfeld talking about unknown unknowns, which kind of gets blown up into this ridiculous thing. And you're like, well, that actually makes a lot of sense, right? or John Kerry being accused of flip-flopper, being a flip-flopper. And you're like, well, maybe I want someone who might actually recognize that they were incorrect about something and change their mind, right? But that those two things, you know,
blown out of proportion pretty quick.
Yeah, significantly hampered that their political aspirations, right? And I think we can see similar stuff in fitness as far as the complexity of what's going on, not really resonating with individuals and people wanting, you know, fast track solutions, 6-week challenges, all that kind of stuff.
5-minute abs.
So, yeah. So how do you, as sort of like a content curator and creator in this space, think about that balance? It's obviously different when you're not like going to lose an election because you accidentally, you know, said that there might be some truth to both sides of something. But there is some sort of disconnect there in terms of what people want versus what is the actual answer to their question.
Yeah, that's a tough one. You know, in today's day and age, there's a lot of finger pointing and there's a lot of cynicism and there's a lot of negativity in media, and there's also a lot of, you know, there's not a lot of grace either, which is a big turnoff for anybody who's been in public life before, or who monitors politics regularly, or is passionate about, you know, the public sector. So there's just not a lot of grace in this world when it comes to that. We try and really focus a lot of content on positive things, but we also just try to be truth tellers to an extent. We don't often wade into controversial topics, but when we do, we try and do that with a level head that there is controversy in the world, and there are sometimes things that happen that are wrong. And just because it's wrong, it doesn't mean we're not going to talk about it. But thankfully in CrossFit, the community as a whole is really very gracious, and they're really very forgiving as well. And they don't have this kind of natural cynicism to everything that's out there. You know, we talk a lot about health and nutrition and science, and there's a lot of debate in that community. There's a lot of really good, healthy debate inside of what's the best way to pursue healthy nutrition, and I think that's great. So we don't try to be the end-all, be-all on questions and topics like that. But we are 100% willing to be wrong, and actually we've been wrong a couple of times. We admit that, and just trying to be a level-headed publication that isn't agenda-driven to a certain extent. We do have biases, like we 100% support a diet that's largely healthy eating and isn't specifically paleo, isn't specifically Whole30 or specifically anything, but, you know, nuts, fruits, seeds, little starches, meat, you know, and it's lower in the carbohydrates, and you know, and healthy, and it's sourced really well. You know, we have some biases there. We're obviously biased about CrossFit, and we're gonna preach that to the high heavens. And we're gonna continue to, you know, have debates about the efficacy of CrossFit, and we're probably going to side with them a lot, as we tend to be pretty supportive. You know, so that many of the people are, you know, Tommy is on our staff. He's a CrossFit HQ. You know, Jessica, our managing editor, is a coach. You know, I'm a CrossFit athlete, and you know, Matt's a CrossFit athlete, and Eric's a CrossFit athlete. We're all do CrossFit, so we obviously have our biases, and that's going to naturally sort of exude out of our content. And we're not going to apologize for that kind of stuff, but we try not to be super biased about things. But we also, because we focus on such positive content, and sports related content, it tends to be very positive. It makes our job so much easier. And we don't have to be cynical about the world. We don't have to, you know, just assume that everybody out there is wrong, or that we are right, or that, you know, we're trying to call people out for changing their minds and such. You know, we just, it's just not our agenda. We're not really agenda driven. we do have a mission, and our mission is to educate, inform, and inspire a global CrossFit fitness community that loves what they do. And part of the education sometimes is wading into a more controversial topic. It's not always, but sometimes that's where it takes us. Try not to do it too much, but I guess the news is the news. Sometimes it's out of our hands. I don't think we'd be good stewards of information if we chose just not to cover it because it was controversial. I think that would
there you have
make us
it.
less authoritative if we decided to do that.
Yeah, you got. Hey, if it's out there, you got to cover it.
Yeah, don't make it bigger than what it is. And if you look, people have called us out and be like, "Why are you like stirring up controversy or something like that?" I'm like, look at the headline. Like if you thought we were trying to stir up controversy, I would have written a headline that was super catchy and click driven. And I can do that all day long, and I can jack up the clicks on Facebook, and I can make you it seem like something it's not, and play a smoke and mirrors game. But the truth of the matter is, this person did this, and that's really what happened. And just because you find it controversial doesn't mean that other people don't have a right to know that it happened. That we're bought into this community. This is a part of our lives, our daily lives, and unfortunately, this world isn't sunshine and rainbows. But doesn't mean we have to have a doom and gloom kind of mentality about it. But we still have to be adults about it too.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point where someone, may accuse you of
we get that
clickbaiting or whatever, and it's like, listen, if I wanted to play that game, I could.
You'll never believe what Dave Castro just said.
Yeah, it's like, listen, you don't even know what I could do to get you to click on this if I wanted to.
The secret life of Dave Castro's and the rules or something. I don't even know. I could do this all day long. I could just come up with, use those things like you'll never believe what, and people do that in the secret life or the controversy that Greg Glassman doesn't want you to know about. And, that's like tabloid journalism. And, when we start writing that stuff, I mean, please send us hate mail. I'll give you our company's address. You can send a clown fully dressed up to make fun of us and tell us jokes, because that's what we would become. We would be a joke. But until that happens, think a little bit before you write in a nasty gram. But if you do write in a nasty gram, chances are I'll probably respond, or one of us will respond. We respond to all the nasty grams, including and all the love mail. So it's a part of the business. You're never going to make everybody happy, but we do try to be adults about it.
There we go. So on that note, the Morning Chalk Up, a delightful place to read CrossFit news.
Absolutely.
A great place to send hate mail.
Yes. Send it.
Yeah. If you go to the Morning Chalk Up website, you can subscribe. It's real straightforward. What else should the people do or know about? We got mountain climbing pictures on your Instagram.
Photos. No, just go to morningchalkup.com, subscribe. If we're not doing it well, send us some feedback. We check our inbox every single day and respond to that. And if you got a tip for something that's really cool that we should be covering, tips at morningchalkup.com is a great way to reach our editorial team. And don't hesitate to tell us we're doing a bad job or a good job, because it's about improving, and we want to do a good job. But other than that, social media, you're always going to find us there. But the real heart and soul is going to be on come to your inbox every morning at about 2:30 in the morning.
There you
Wake
go.
up early.
Long form over short form. Thanks for listening all the way through. I admire your grit, your persistence, and your perseverance. Since you made it, I have a few favors to ask of you. Go ahead and open up the show notes on whatever podcast player you use. In there, you'll find links to all the resources that were mentioned throughout the show. There's also some links there in which you can leave a review or subscribe to the show. And podcasters are always harping on this because this actually makes a difference in terms of the algorithms that recommend podcasts to new people. So if you do that, it helps more people find the show. And if you head over to toddneef.com, you can sign up to receive most of my thoughts and writing, which really only go out to the email list. A lot of it never makes it to the blog or the podcast. So if you like what I have to say and you want to see some of my recommendations and stuff that I've been checking out, go ahead and subscribe to that email newsletter as well.